Hello and welcome into a brand new Sports Hub Patriots podcast. I'm Alex Barth from 98.5 The Sports Hub, 98.5thesportshub.com. Preview show here on Friday, getting ready for the Patriots and the Rams coming up on Sunday. We're joined by Christopher Price. He covers the Patriots for the Boston Globe, here to help us take a look at this matchup. Chris, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Alex. Thanks for having me.
So I actually want to start, before we get to Patriots-Rams, with just to look back in that Patriots-Bears game, because a lot of people have talked about that game as being, a momentum builder, a jumping off point, and at the same time, a lot has been made of the fact that the Bears are in rough shape. They had a lot of players hurt. They fired the offensive coordinator after the game. Like, clearly everything wasn't exactly clicking there. So, yeah. It becomes about how much was that the Patriots taking a step, how much was that the Bears, and, especially for the defense, look, I'm not expecting 9 sacks again. It'd be great, but I think that's kind of ludicrous. When you look at that, like, how much from that game really is a potential momentum jump off point for the Patriots versus how much was just the Bears being a mess?
I think the Patriots caught him at the right time. Honestly, I think there's something to that. I think both things can be true. I think the Patriots needed that win. They needed that road win. And they needed that defensive performance in particular to kind of stabilize things a little bit. Look, we both know that the run defense isn't anywhere near where it needs to be. They had problems setting the edge. They had problems getting after the quarterback. They had problems containing quarterbacks coming into that game. And to have a get-right game like that, I think it's okay. I'm not going to say that all of a sudden they're going to become a playoff team, but I think a win like that, when you're at that stage of your overall development as a team, as a young team, as a franchise, as a roster, however you want to look at it, I think it's a good win. And now the key is, and you know this as well as I do, the whole key for them is to be able to maintain that momentum moving forward, to be able to build off of that, because this team, as well as they played against the Bears at times, they just haven't been able to be all that consistent over the course of the season. Now is when you need to see them take that step. You need to see them build on that win over Chicago and take it to the next level. I always go back to the quote that Jerry Montgomery gave us earlier in the year, when I think he was talking about Jeremiah Farms and talking about the baseline. And he was like, okay, that's great. Now here's the baseline then. You've shown me you can play this well. That's the expectation level. Let's see where we can go from here. So I think it's a good win. I wouldn't say all of a sudden it turns them into a competitive playoff team, but I think it's a starting point for them. And I think really for me, they need to be able to continue to do some of the things that they did against the Bears. They need to do them against the Rams. They need to do them against the Dolphins, the Colts. If they're able to kind of create that consistency moving forward, then I think you can point back to the Bears game as the starting point.
And Drake Maye talked about that too this week, talked about learning how to win, pointing out they've won back-to-back. They've lost back-to-back games. They haven't won back-to-back games. It's actually been, from a NFL calendar standpoint, this week marks 2 years since the Patriots won back-to-back games. They won 3 in a row, weeks 8, 10, and 11 in 2022. And here we are, week 11 of 2024. They haven't won consecutive games since, as they try to do that. You mentioned building on certain things within that Bears game. If there's a couple that stand out specifically, like if you could pick 2 or 3 things that clicked in the Bears game that hadn't been clicking, that need to carry over and they need to build on, what are you looking for specifically for them to build on against the Rams?
I think 2 things. I'll give you one thing on each side of the ball. First of all, an ability to contain the quarterback, to be able to kind of keep him in the pocket, maintain that gap discipline, maintain your rush lanes. Don't let things break down. Very, very good. Look, and granted, again, we can go back to before, the fact that the Bears offensive line is a bit of a mess, but I think they did that against the Bears. I think they did that against a good young quarterback in Caleb Williams. And so you need to be able to maintain that moving forward, regardless of the quarterback that you're facing. You're not going to see a guy this weekend in Matthew Stafford who has a propensity to roam like some of the other guys that we've seen over the course of the year, but that is a big step in the right direction. Then the other thing too, on the offensive side of the ball, the running game and the run blocking. I thought that there was a lot to like about that performance, both from Ramondre Stevenson and the offensive line. They need to continue to move that forward. They need to be able to hit that 4-yard per carry marker. They need to be able to continue to clear holes for Ramondre Stevenson, like we saw over the first 2 weeks of the season. If they're able to execute on both of those things, then I think that represents, like we talked about before, being able to build on that success. Those 2 things represent really an Achilles heel for both sides of the ball. If they can build on those moving forward against the Rams, Dolphins, and Colts, then I think you might really have something.
And what I like about both those points, all starts at the line of scrimmage. It all starts front seven on defense, offensive line, and how many weeks were they just getting blown off the ball time and time again? And look, they definitively won the line of scrimmage against the Bears last week on both sides. I don't think they're going to do that against the Rams. I'd be surprised. Now, the Rams offensive line's banged up. This is 2 weeks in a row. They're going to get a team with at least one backup tackle, but it doesn't need to be this overwhelming win like it was against the Bears. Again, it'd be great. It's unrealistic. It just can't be that one-sided loss that they had the past few weeks. Starting on the defensive side and helping with that, Yannick Ngakoue. This is a team that didn't have much of a pass rush before they faced the Bears' third-string line last week. They didn't really have any pass rushers. There weren't that many guys you looked to really beyond Keon White after they traded Joshua Uche and said that's a guy you can trust to get after the quarterback. Now Ngakoue comes in, not expecting him to totally replace Matthew Judon, but I like the signing. He's only 29 years old. He wasn't flashing with the Ravens, but he was able to make some plays. I don't know that he changes everything, but I am kind of expecting to notice his impact this Sunday against the Rams. How do you feel about his addition and his presence this week?
I think we're going to see more from him than maybe we initially expected. And part of that look is just from a personnel perspective. I don't think Dietrich Wise is going to play. We're still, an hour or so away from the injury report, but not having practiced, really all week. And also, too, to your point, they really don't have, outside of Keon White, they don't have a quote-unquote pass rusher here on this roster anymore. Maybe an exterior, kind of an edge guy, an edge presence. As we sit here right now, we don't know what's going to happen with Christian Barmore going into this weekend. Drake Maye, kind of opened the door and said, well, maybe he's going to play a little bit. But I think, and this is something that both Covington and Mayo said, you need to manage expectations with him, at least initially. So I wouldn't count on a whole lot this weekend. But yeah, this is a sneaky important area of need for this team because, as you mentioned, they lost Judon. They traded away Uche. Barmore has been out of the mix all season. I'm not saying that this rises to the level of, left tackle or wide receiver depth, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the Patriots. And again, some of it depends on free agency, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the Patriots prioritize, an edge guy in the offseason. I think Ngakoue brings a lot to the table. And I think we talked about this in the locker room the other day. He didn't sound like a guy who was a one and done guy. I think, on the surface, you see a guy who played for 7 teams in 9 years, never really truly found a home, went back to Baltimore before he was waived by them. This is a guy who I think you could not build around, but could be an important guy when it comes to creating a culture in your locker room. This is a veteran. Yeah. This is a well-respected guy. It's clear, talking to some of the guys in the locker room, this is a well-respected guy. So I'm going to be interested to see not just this year, not just this week, but his potential role on this roster moving forward.
Yeah, it's a good point. I look at it as, the high-level bridge guy, potentially. You give him, a 2-year contract. And we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. He hasn't even played a game, but the buy-in did jump out. Like that, and it was a big question when they claimed it. Was like, is he going to be a problem in the locker room? A guy that's only here for a couple months, is looking ahead to free agency. He seems fully engaged. And if he is engaged and he is giving you something, they need, like you said, multiple pass rushers this offseason. And if you can check that box, and maybe he's not your Matthew Judon, maybe he's not your lead guy, you go out and get somebody else, but maybe he's your Joshua Uche. Maybe he's that secondary guy, and then adds that veteran leadership thing. That would be a good fit, I will say, for the people that are more interested in that lead edge guy. Georgia, Tennessee this weekend, James Pierce, Michael Williams, 2 first-round picks on the field. Check that out. You mentioned Christian Barmore, though, too. And Drake Maye said today, like you said, there is no expectation. That is the expectation. There is no expectation. He's obviously been through a lot medically. There was some thought that he may never get on the field again. Here he is just a few months later, like within the same season. I'm not expecting to see him Sunday, just having only practiced one day. If he does play, like you said, super limited, but do you think there's a chance we see him this year? And how much can he truly add to the defense at this point?
Yeah, I do think that he plays this year. I don't know how many snaps he's going to get moving forward. I don't know if we're going to reach a point in December or January where he's playing, 60, 70% of the snaps. But just to be able to get back on the field after what he's gone through, I think says an awful lot about him and his ability to kind of persevere through what had to be a very difficult process. We both know guys on IR, it's a weird situation. You're kind of in limbo. You're on the team, but you're not really on the team. And it feels like Mayo did everything he could to kind of wrap his arms around him metaphorically and say, look,
Right.
we still want you around here. Yeah, I do. I think he's going to play this year. I think he's going to play this year. I think the real impact will be for him in 2025. I think he just wants to get, look, the expectation for me is that I think he just wants to get his legs underneath him. And I think he wants to be able to get back to something resembling normalcy for a football player. And if he can lay that foundation, lay that base, kind of treat the rest of this year like a modified preseason, for lack of a better term, and just get back out there and hit and get hit, then I think he's setting himself up very nicely for 2025 and beyond. This is a guy who's a real impact guy. We saw this guy at the end of the year last year. I talked to Richard Seymour about him, and Richard Seymour was just effusive in his praise of this young man. So I think that there's a little bit of Seymour there, and I'm real cautious about that. The size, right, the ability to hold up against the run, and also deliver some real pressure against, along the interior there. Yeah, look, he's going to be an important part of what they want to do defensively moving forward. And I think that, he will continue to kind of ramp up over the course of the rest of this year with an eye maybe toward 2025 and beyond.
I go back to 2020 when they drafted Cameron McGrone, and it's not exactly apples to apples, but they drafted Cameron McGrone in the 5th round, Joshua Bledsoe as well. McGrone was coming off a torn ACL. Bledsoe hurt his wrist in the pre-draft process. So they both started the year on IR, and the team ended up activating them. It was December, or designating them to return. Didn't activate them and ran out the clock, but designated them to return so they could get that 3 weeks of practice and get that experience. So they weren't coming into their sophomore season totally raw. Now, Christian Barmore's obviously played in the league, and the fact that they activated him as early as they did tells me that, there's a better chance he plays, especially when you look at the timeline. They have 3 weeks to activate him, but that 3rd week is the bye week. So he essentially can have a full month of practice without having to play in a game, if that's the route they want to take, if they don't activate him sooner. So, I think the plan is for him to play, but it would, there's a similar thought pattern behind that. Like you said, modified preseason, where next year he's not going back out there for the first time week 1 and having to get his legs under him. He's already played a couple games. He already feels comfortable, and they could use him because we've talked about the pass rush issues. And look, you need a pass rush off the edge. You need a pass rush against the tackle. That's not who he is, but interior pressure can blow plays up like nothing else. And to get him back in that role, I think would be incredibly beneficial. One more quick one on the defense before we move over. It's been a couple solid games here for this Patriots secondary, and they've kind of emerged as a little more of a strength. Christian Gonzalez has been playing incredibly well. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp coming into this one. Tough matchups. How do you see them faring, and who do you see Gonzalez covering? Do you put him on the veteran Kupp, who's a little more savvy, but maybe isn't what he was once athletically, or do you put him on Nacua, who's the more athletically gifted of the two?
I put him on Cooper Kupp. I do, because Cooper Kupp is still, even after all these years, he's still clearly Stafford's favorite target. I think that in a pinch, that's where he's going to go. And I think it's absolutely vital to have your best cornerback facing a guy like that. Look, I'm with you. I think that Ngakoue has probably got a little bit more spring in his step, a little bit more explosiveness, at least at this stage of his career. And maybe that's a better fit for, I don't know, Jonathan Jones, someone else in that secondary. But I think it's going to be Kupp and Gonzalez, and it's not going to be exclusive, start to finish, wire to wire. But I agree with you too. I think that when you look at Gonzalez, this season, he's building. He's emerging as one of the best young cornerbacks in the league. I don't know if I'd put him in that conversation, that short list quite yet, but I think it's incredibly encouraging to be able to see what he did in the wake of what happened to him last year with his abbreviated season, to be able to come out and be this competitive and assert himself and say, look, I'm the number one corner. I want to take that guy. Look, he'd never say this, but he's a step away from having that list of number one receivers in his locker where he's kind of checking guys off. I love that attitude. I love that approach. I love that sense of, this is my job. I'm the number one corner on this team. You have to be a little bit cocky. You have to be a little bit confident to step into that role. And I think he's done that this year. He's not going to brag. He's not going to be over the top, as we saw in the mic'd up and we talked to him in the locker room. This is one of the more quiet cornerbacks I think you're ever going to come across in the league. But I think at the same time, this is a guy who is emerging as a real defensive presence for this team. And really, when you stack cornerbacks across the league, he's emerging as one of the best young corners in the National Football League right now. I think ultimately he is, if they get into dicey situations on Sunday, if there are gotta have it plays, we're going to see man coverage and we're going to see Christian Gonzalez going up against Cooper Kupp.
On the other side of the ball, you talked before about the run game, so let's start there. It sounds like they want to use that same offensive line again, which is left to right, Vidarian Lowe, Michael Jordan, Ben Brown, Mike Onwenu, Demontre Jacobs. They use him for a couple games, look good. They try to get Lane Robinson back in the lineup against Tennessee. It didn't work. Hopefully they've learned their lesson at this point, that continuity counts, continuity matters. And I've tried to turn that into like a tangible thing outside of just being like, well, they play better together. And I think the run game's a great way of doing it, because when they do some of the zone run stuff, it's really all spacing, and you got to know where everybody else is. And I think the big difference last week was Ramondre Stevenson was able to get going, and he wasn't getting hit in the backfield. And it was the first time really since he came back from that foot injury, I think, that you saw him regularly falling forward on contact, not allowing the first defender to bring him down, just running angry, running physically. And you need to build up a head of steam to do that. And he had an opportunity to do that. Did you feel the same way about the game last week? And do you think the offensive line can replicate that this week against a really, really good Rams defensive front?
It's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge this week. It's going to be a much bigger challenge than what we saw last week in Chicago. The way that Ramondre ran last weekend, and look, I have nothing to really base this on. This was just optics. He looked a little bit more dynamic. You know,
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, it's that combination of physicality plus a little bit of flair, a little bit of flash. You know, I think of, you know, even though he's not as tall, like an Eric Dickerson type, the way he ran, the way he delivered hits to opposing linebackers. And, you know, when he got to that second level, I also think too, and look, I want to dismiss the idea of like intangibles and stuff, but I talked to a bunch of wide receivers in the days, or a bunch of offensive linemen in the days leading up to that game against Chicago. And to a man, they had this gnawing feeling that they were letting Ramondre down a little bit. That this was a guy who was absolutely vital to what they wanted to get done offensively. And look, I'm not saying that Ramondre doesn't bear, you know, at least a portion of the blame with the run game struggles in the previous weeks, whatever, you know, whether it was the foot or whether it was a bad matchup or whatever the case may be. But when you talked about it, Ben Brown talked about it, Demontre Jacobs talked about it with me, the sense of obligation that they had to felt to Ramondre Stevenson, I thought was almost sweet in that regard. And it kind of, I wrote about this today, and it kind of, you know, fed into the idea of what AVP was telling us about the pickups, that they're playing for each other, the idea of personal accountability, the idea that, look, I don't want to let my guy down. In that burgeoning sense of teamwork and togetherness on the offensive side of the ball has started to come through in the run game. I don't know if that's sustainable. I don't know if that was just a one-off thing and, you know, they're going to go back to struggling next week. But I think it's enough for a sense of optimism in terms of, you know, they're headed in the right direction. And you brought up the idea of continuity too, and I think that feeds into it as well. You know, they got some good matchups. They were able to get Ramondre to the second level. And when you get him to the second level, I think that pays off. I also think too, when it comes to the run game, let's not discount the role that both Hasty and Gibson played on Sunday. As change-up guys, we saw more of Hasty in the backfield. And I think even 5 or 10 snaps to give Ramondre a little bit of a blow, if Hasty can be effective in that role, then I think that just adds another layer to what they want to do on the ground.
Real quick on Stevenson and the offensive line saying they were maybe letting him down. The 3 previous games, Stevenson had more yards after contact than he did total yards. So
that's a great stat.
I wouldn't say that the line was wrong in feeling that way. I would say that it's pretty accurate. Again, not that it's Stevenson's entirely blameless, but when the running back's getting hit behind the line as often as he was, he really does that much of a chance. And I like the point about Gibson and Hasty too. This is something people who listen to this podcast know, like, I was getting red in the face about at the beginning of the year, and I was getting red in the face about last year, that the days of the 300 touch running back are over. Those guys are dinosaurs. Like, Derrick Henry can do it. He's built like Rob Gronkowski. Christian McCaffrey did it, and look at him now. Like, he's not the same player, and he was banged up. However good your running back is, these teams that rely on one running back to get them through the season always fall off late because players are bigger, faster, stronger in the modern game, and they're getting hit in ways that guys like LaDainian Tomlinson or Priest Holmes or Corey Dillon or all these guys back then, like, weren't getting hit. So I think and Stevenson led the league in touches, I think, through the first like 3 or 4 weeks this year. So to give him a rest is important. I think 20 carries for Ramondre. You'll get more out of 20 carries from Ramondre Stevenson than like 25 to 30 because he's going to be fresher. And I thought Gibson specifically, he's had a much smaller role, but they gave him one drive last week. He ran the ball well. He's also a little more dynamic as a pass catcher. I'm kind of hoping that what he did last week, however brief, maybe opens the door for him to get more opportunities moving forwards.
Yeah, I know our guy Taylor Kyles too has been curious about using him as a pass catcher, using him more in the passing game, and I think that's important. I do. I look. It comes down to just wanting to get as many quality reps out of your primary running back as possible. And I know Ramondre is not going to ever want to come out of the game, but if you could manage it, it's almost like a pitch count with a starting pitcher. You know how effective the starter is going to be for the first, 65, 70 pitches. And then you get to the third time through the order and the numbers start to fall off a little bit. I think that's the best analogy here. When you talk about Ramondre Stevenson, give him 20 carries, see what he could do. Through the first half, he averaged 4 yards a carry. That was the first time he hit that 4 yards a carry marker, I think, since week 2. And so, look, he's going to benefit from the occasional blow from time to time. And I think it's something you need to keep in mind when you're putting together an offensive game plan. You need to spread the wealth among those backs, because at least so far, we're halfway through the season, they've shown an ability to be productive when used, the backups, the two guys used in a limited role.
You mentioned spreading out the snaps. Wide receivers, it sounds like Kendrick Bourne's going to play again this week. Do those snaps come from KJ Osborne? Do we see less of the rookies? Is there a way to maybe get everybody on the field? Like, what do you see them doing at the wide receiver position? Because it feels like Van Pelt said they're starting to figure it out. It still feels like it's kind of up in the air week to week there.
It feels like, for me, I don't think Kendrick is 100% yet. And look, and we can debate the whole Kendrick Bourne not getting any snaps. I don't think that was the reason why he didn't get any snaps. I think anyone else on this roster who dressed and then does not get a single snap, I would be concerned about their state of mind. But I had a chance to talk to Kendrick twice this week in the locker room. This is a guy, is one of the most optimistic, upbeat, and it's all genuine with him. It's not BS. So I don't think I wouldn't necessarily be concerned about his state of mind, his buy-in here. I do think those snaps are going to come from probably a combination of guys, most likely KJ Osborne. I remain surprisingly underwhelmed this year by Osborne, because he was a guy in the spring and the summer who did absolutely everything he was asked to do. He checked off all the boxes, and I don't know, maybe it's just switching from one quarterback to another, whatever the case may be, that he's having chemistry issues or connectivity, whatever the problem is. I don't know, but it's just the numbers this year for him are not great. He's still, though, he's doing everything else he needs to do. I'll say that about him. He's a willing blocker. He's a good teammate. Set the social media stuff aside. Maybe that wasn't the best idea, but I think it's going to come from KJ Osborne. And I don't know what the future is for him on this team, a one-year deal. You also look at a guy like Tyquan Thornton, where his head is at and where his game is at least as we sit here in mid-November. But the rest of the wide receivers, I think, are in relatively good shape. I remain fascinated by Kayshon Boutte, and I know we've talked about this before. It feels like the light is coming on for him very gradually. And I've used this analogy before. It feels like it's like a dimmer switch going on for him. It's a gradual process, but he's winning 50-50 balls. He's a willing blocker. He's doing everything that he needs to do to be able to see the field more. And I think he's being rewarded with more snaps.
When I got asked about Boutte a lot during the summer, and because I initially didn't look like he was going to make the team, especially because they were so high on Tyquan Thornton, which never made a ton of sense to me. But it was like, you see really high level play from him, Boutte, for like a day or two, and then you don't really see him again for a week. And then he'd come back, and it was like, yes, I see the talent. I see why people are excited about him. But if you can't do it consistently, it's going to be tough to get on the field. And for whatever reason, like, the consistency is there. He's doing it week in and week out. There haven't been these massive highs and massive lows with him. It's kind of steady. And there's a lot to that. I think that he can, improve the overall level, but you're not ripping your hair out each week wondering which Kayshon Boutte is going to show up. And for a guy like that, I think that is a main reason why the team is starting to rely on him so much.
I think he is the young wide receiver, and I'm putting the the veteran guys, Kendrick Bourne, the rest, and specifically the young wide receiver who has benefited the most from the move to Drake Maye.
Yeah,
As opposed
I'd agree
to
with that.
Jacoby Brissett. I think that whatever reason, whether it's chemistry, whether it's just touch, feel, whatever. Again, I think his numbers have been better, and I think, you know, to your point, that he's in a better spot. You know, he's doing everything that he needs to be doing, and it's starting to. The arrow is pointing in the right direction for him. It's a gradual process, but it's pointing in the right direction.
And Drake may trust him, which is huge.
Yeah, and that's huge. That's huge. Look, I mean, look at the end of the game, the end of the Titans game, you know, the throwdown field. And it's just he's also too right now. He's the closest thing this offense has to a home run hitter. I mean, he's averaging like 15 yards a catch, and so I think that's important when you look at the rest of that, you know, wide receiver room, that they do have some guy, LaPop, LeBourne, but a real genuine deep threat. Booty's the closest thing they have to him.
Which is weird because that's not really what he was in college. Like, he did some of that, but he was a catch and run guy. The ceiling comp I heard coming out was Deebo Samuel, which obviously he's not there, but you think about stylistically, like usage wise, and maybe he gets back to that at some point because they need that home run hitter and they don't have any other options. But if they go out and get one of these deep threats, right? A Ted McMillan this offseason or a DK Metcalf, it allows him to play more of that Z role instead of the X, where he's not really playing his natural position right now, which is part of what makes this so impressive for him. We'll wrap this up here the way we usually start a lot of these shows. So I'll put it at the end this time because it does feel like, you know, a few starts in for Drake Maye, he's settling in a little bit. Last week, his least productive game, if you want to call it his worst game, you know, he only threw one pick. He threw 3 in another. So it depends on your definition of worst, but just 25 pass attempts, under 200 yards, not much of a factor in the run game, but he point guarded them to a win. Instead of being the playmaker, he was a distributor. Different look from him. I think that's encouraging. This week, what are you looking for from Drake Maye?
I think, look, if you, and I love the analogy, the point guard analogy, I think that that's what they need from him. I think a willingness to be able to lean on your Ramondre Stevensons and Hunter Henrys and Kendrick Bournes and, you know, the rest of that group to be able to put together a win here. I think that it's going to be a huge challenge, and I don't think I would love to see them be able to build on that consistency, or to be able to build on what they did last week. I think it's going to be an even bigger challenge, though, against a serious team like the Rams. Just there's a gravity there that even though they're not the Aaron Donald all-consuming behemoth defense, a brutal team on both sides of the ball that we saw 2, 3, 4 years ago, I still think there's enough there where they're going to have their hands full, and he's going to have his hands full. I think it's going to be a patient game. I think their wins come when they stay in the teens, and so they're going to have to play. I know the initial question was about Drake Maye, but it's going to have to be a great example of complementary football this Sunday if they want a chance against the Rams. They're going to have to get a couple takeaways. Look, Stafford has thrown, I think, a pick in 5 straight games. I think if you're able to get a pick out of Stafford, you're able to get a little special teams magic, and you get a touchdown of your own, that is enough to keep you competitive in this game. And I think Drake Maye understands that. And so you don't necessarily need to play hero ball this weekend, I guess is my biggest message to him. Is this is not a situation where he has to win the game by himself. He's not going to be able to win this game by himself. He's going to win this game by relying on the guys around him, relying on the offensive line to be able to put together some semblance of a performance that is similar to what we saw last week. And also I wrote about this, we talked about this, just he's got to learn how to slide. He does. He's got to figure that out, man. And I know Van Pelt has talked about, head first versus feet first, and the positives and the negatives there. You got to figure it out sometime soon, because everyone kind of holds their breath when he takes off. And look, he can be Josh Allen. He could truck guys. We've seen that, but that's not sustainable. Get down, take the slide, live to fight another day.
Yeah, I'm with, I don't need him to slide specifically, but giving himself up, I think people maybe don't know that full rules. And that he could just stop and take a knee. As the quarterback, you can give yourself up in any means. And sometimes guys even, go forward so you can kind of tuck and roll and protect your body. But yeah, I remember saying this with Jaden Daniels coming out in the draft, because this was Jaden to another level than what Drake Maye is doing. Like, Jaden Daniels would not just initiate contact at the point of attack, he would go out of his way to hit defenders, which was weird. But I remember saying, first day he gets in the facility, I'd walk him out, I'd walk him to the sideline, point at it, and say, "This is your best friend." And the Patriots may need to do that with Drake Maye. This is the sideline, get to know it real well, but obviously want to see him protect himself better. When looking at this game, if the Patriots are to come away with a win, what will be the big story on Monday? What will we all be talking about? What is the one thing that they will have done right? The one area they will have dominated if they come away with a win?
Continue to play well on defense. You're not going to have the same sort of performance that you did against the Bears. Let's set that expectation level right there. But if you can get a pick from Matthew Stafford, you can slow, not stop, but if you can slow Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, if you can slow that passing game a little bit, then I think that's going to be the storyline if they win this thing. And again, you can't get into a shootout. I know the Rams are not the Rams they were, like I said, a couple of years ago, but you need to keep this thing in the teens, maybe the low 20s if you want a chance in this thing, because you get into a track meet with anyone. I don't think this team is currently built to win games in the 30s, at least right now at this stage of their development. Keep it slow, keep it manageable, run the ball, put together some 6, 7, 8-minute drives, play strong defense, get a takeaway. And again, a little special teams magic wouldn't hurt.
He is Christopher Price. He covers the Patriots for the Boston Globe. Also, it's on Believe Network. It's you and Chris Hogan. I am blanking on the name of the podcast. I should have
the Patriots Report with Chris.
The Patriots Report with Chris Hogan on Thursdays. Check that out. You can find him on Twitter at CPriceGlobe. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Alex. Take care. We'll talk soon.